important? Well, for one thing, this topic is important because there is an increased need for teachers to demonstrate that they are assessment literate. Now, what is assessment literacy? Well, Stiggins was the first L1 scholar to bring about this term. And he basically said, if you are a teacher and you had high levels of assessment literacy, it means that you know what to assess and why, how to assess it, what the possible problems with any kind of testing and assessment might be, and how to prevent these problems from even occurring. Also, you were knowledgeable about what the potential negative consequences of bad assessments would be. Now, another important rationale for being assessment literate and knowing what is best practice in exam development is teachers spend, some people say, between 30 to 50% of their time as teachers engaged in assessment or assessment related activities. So where do we begin, really? Well, in trying to think about where to begin in trying to share what is assessment literacy, I think there's a number of things that teachers we need to ask ourselves before we sit down to start developing an exam or a test. We need to know what kind of test it's going to be. As you know, there are many types of tests: achievement, proficiency, placement, diagnostics, criterion reference, norm reference, etc. So what type of test will we be giving? Who is responsible for its development, and what information is needed from the test to the various stakeholders about student achievement? What curricular outcomes or objectives or what part of the curriculum will be assessed? And if we're lucky, there will be test specifications from which to work. Although many departments do not have test specifications. A test specification, it's kind of like a blueprint of an assessment that people who develop assessments work from to make parallel versions of a test. Once you've determined whether or not there's a test specification, you need to figure out what kinds of items that will be on your test or what kinds of tasks you'll have on your assessments. What mode of testing will you be using? And that's become an increasingly difficult question these days. Is it going to be the traditional paper pencil test, or are you assessing online through a computer-based or a computer adaptive test? Or are you using some kind of take-home assessment? How long will the test be? How many items will be on the test? How much will it be weighted? And what will be the various weightings of the individual sections of the test compared to the test as a whole, etc. So lots of questions to ask ourselves before we actually begin the process. The next question we need to think about is where we get our exam content. Well, the logical place to start is from the curriculum, because a curriculum informs our learning objectives or our learning outcomes, whatever it is you might call them. It also has information on the kind of level that the students need to reach, the test types that you utilize, any grammatical structures that are important, vocabulary level attainment. And if you're a content teacher, it has information about what kinds of content you need to have taught students and they need to have learned. So your first stop is the curriculum. Then, because the course materials presumably are chosen with the curriculum in mind, the next best place to go is your actual course materials. These course materials provide models of the types of test tasks that you'll want to use, models of the question types as well. One thing to remember is to not include any kind of test item or task type on an assessment that is new. You need to practice anything like this beforehand in a low stakes environment, because if you include a new testing format on your tests and students don't do well on that section of the test, you don't know whether it's because they don't know the content you're assessing through that format, or they couldn't figure out the format. So that could have the potential to affect a test's reliability, which we'll talk about here in a second. Now, the content should be similar to what students see in the textbooks. in terms of themes and things like that, but it shouldn't be directly from the textbook. I'm not sure how this is in Saudi, but when I first came to the UAE, the students who came to us from high schools were used to being given the reading comprehension text to memorize before they had their big exam on it. And that, of course, is something that, we would never do in my context. So, of course, you shouldn't be giving students parts of the tests in order to review or memorize beforehand. Now, an important thing that I want to talk about in the next few minutes are the cornerstones of assessment. And these are pretty much the guiding principles that we should all keep in mind. And it's important that this is not just in English language or this type of testing. These cornerstones exist in all types of testing. So we're going to talk a little bit about validity, reliability, practicality, washback, authenticity, transparency, and security. Now, some of you might know a little bit about what these principles are. And if we had longer time together, I would ask you to turn on your mics and share a definition or two, but unfortunately I don't. Probably there's one that many of you have not heard of, and that's probably the cornerstone of washback. So we're going to talk about each of these in a little bit more depth. Let's start with validity. Validity is, some people think, the most important cornerstone of testing or guiding principle. And this is basically, does the assessment measure what it is supposed to measure? So it's the degree to which a measurement instrument is appropriate for its particular purpose. In my view, there are three types of validity that are important for classroom teachers. There are many types of validity that are out there, okay? And if you want to learn about a lot of other types of validity, I recommend you go to this publication that I put out for the British Council. Many of you might have definitions that are published in this glossary entitled An A to Z of Second Language Assessment. It's teacher written definitions of important testing terms. I believe George can help you get a copy of that if you'd like, but it's very accessible on the British Council website as well. So for me, the three types of validity that I think teachers really need to know about are construct validity, content validity, and face validity. So let's have a look at what each of these means. Content validity, for me, is the most important. So if you've ever had a student who comes to you and says, I get lots of students because people know that I know some stuff about testing. So a lot of my students come to me and they say things like, Miss, there was a section on my test about blah, 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 but the teacher didn't teach that in the class. Now, if that is true, that is a major violation in content validity, because content validity is assessing what and how you teach. So any type of, especially achievement type testing that you do, you need to make sure that you have actually taught the content either in your class or assigned it as homework. If you put questions on a test on content that you haven't taught, that is a serious violation of content validity. So assessing what you teach is important, but also how you teach. So you need to also make sure you use formats and tasks that students are familiar with. This is where not using new things comes into play. If you introduce a new testing format, this could have an impact on your test overall validity and reliability. Now, construct validity, many testers feel that construct validity is the most important type of validity. And this is basically, does your testing procedures and methods, do they have an underlying fit with the way you teach? Now, I'm a language teacher. Maybe many of you are English teachers as well. And the methodology that I personally espouse and use when I teach English is communicative language teaching, with a focus on authentic target language use and teaching language for real world contexts. So if my methodology is communicative language teaching, then I have to make sure my testing methods are also congruent with that type of teaching methodology. So if I'm a CLT teacher in class, but I use testing methods that are straight from the audiolingual or grammar translation method, I don't have construct validity in my assessment. Now, face validity is a third type of validity, which is very important for teachers. And this is actually refers to the credibility or the level of acceptance that stakeholders have in your assessment instrument. So what can happen to a test face validity? Well, anytime you see a typo or you see a formatting problem, anytime you see something like that, or an item violation, that is or has the potential to affect the test face validity. Let's move on to the second cornerstone, reliability. And this is basically the consistency of your test scores. So this is the idea whereby you give the same test at different times to the same groups of students, that if the test is reliable, they would produce similar results. Now, one important thing to remember with regard to reliability is that the way we rate and mark can have an impact on our grading. And we'll touch upon more examples of that when I see you back on December 6th. So what kinds of things can affect a test reliability? Well, factors within the test. The way we write our items. If we have item violations, this can affect reliability. If we have new formats as well, the length of the test can cause an impact. Let's say you write a test and you decide, the test is 40 questions and you give students 2 hours because that's the length of your class period. Sometimes students are able to find, if they have too much time, what happens when our students have too much time on a test? Sometimes they become disruptive. They start looking around. There could be some funny business going on. Other times they have enough time to look at other parts of the test and find answers to previous questions. So we don't want that. So we have to make sure that the length of our test is right. So the rule of thumb for deciding how much time to give students when you write an assessment is as follows. You write a test. You give the same test to another teacher who has not looked at it or helped you write it. You time that teacher taking the test, and let's say it takes that teacher 15 minutes. You give your students anywhere between 3 and 4 times this much. So if it's 15 minutes on the part of the teacher taking the test, you give your students between 45 minutes to 1 hour. That's pretty much the rule of thumb. Objective type questions, if you've got lots of MCQs, take anywhere between 45 seconds to 1 minute for a student to do. So that's another indicator as well. Another factor that could have an impact on reliability is how we administer tests. So the setting is really important. Like we need to make sure that the setting that our students are in terms of the exam hall, for example, is well lit. In our part of the world, we have to think about air conditioning. Okay, so students have to be cool and comfortable. These kinds of things, and the implications for administrative factors, especially when students are taking tests online at home, we can't be sure that the setting that they're in is conducive to test taking reliability. We also want to make sure we use, especially if we give the same exam to multiple classes, that we use the same procedures. IELTS and TOEFL, when we invigilate those exams, there is a script that we have to follow because these tests are given all over the world, and we have to make sure that everybody who takes the test gets the same instructions. The timing during the day as well can have an impact. In hindsight, this time of day, is this a good time for you all? I'm not sure. I think in the UAE, this is about the time when students in this part of the world, let's see, what time is it? Yeah, it's about, well, they've either just had lunch or they're going to go into having lunch. So, 10 o'clock in the morning's the ideal time. Basically, everybody's well rested. They've had their caffeine. etc. But the late afternoon or right after our students have eaten a big lunch, this is often called the graveyard shift in training circles, because it is the time of day when students or people might have eaten a big meal and they're getting sleepy, their energy levels are going down. So you need to think of the timing as well. Scoring factors can have a key impact, especially what are known as intra and inter-rater reliability. It is hoped that when you mark your students' writing samples, that you engage in moderation, whereby you use your scale, your rubric, and you all practice as a group of teachers before you actually start the marking. So inter-rater reliability means that everybody, it means between raters. So it means everybody who's marking from a certain rubric is using that rubric in a correct way. So if it's an A paper, it's an A for everyone. Problems exist if it's like, if George gives a paper an A and Lamia gives it a D, then we have a problem because people aren't marking to the actual rubric. They're not calibrating. Intra-rater reliability refers to your internal standard as a marker. So if you think about it, when teachers, when do we do our marking? Well, for me, I do my marking either at night after I've had a full day at work, or if I have an hour here or there during the day, or on the weekend. The best time for me to do marking is on the weekend because I don't have a teaching schedule on the weekend. So I have to make sure that the times that I mark, I'm marking to the same internal standard. So that refers to your own standard. Now, affective factors are also another thing we have to keep in mind. Affect refers to our emotions. So we need to make sure that our students have good test-taking strategies. And by good test-taking strategies, I mean strategies that aren't, those tricks that students use to get extra points if they don't know the answer. And good test-taking strategies are those that are synonymous with good learning strategies. And being familiar with a format as well is important. Now, you all know what test anxiety is, and students in our part of the world suffer from test anxiety. One way to improve the affective filter of students when they go into a test is to include an easy question at the beginning of the test. Have the question that is number one on the test be an easy one. If it's an easy one, when students answer it correctly, their anxiety levels go down. Let's move on to practicality. And this is basically the availability of time and resources to make a test production cycle valuable. You have to make sure that when you're in charge of a test development project, you build in enough time where you can prepare, grade, and analyze, and also give feedback and reflect on your test. Now, what often happens, because I work with a lot of teachers with testing, week one of the semester, I say to everyone, time to start thinking about the midterm. And they say, oh, midterm, that's week 10. We have time. And then all of a sudden, week 10 is upon us. And oftentimes teachers, what they do in week 9, they throw something together in panic mode where there's not enough time to have it vetted. There's not enough time to get the mistakes out of it and things like that. So building in enough time for the assessment cycle is important. And oftentimes practicality concerns are the reason that teachers do not want to become involved in the assessment process. A typical scenario is as follows. Teachers stand up during an exam and complain about something you've written. So I say to them, that's a good point. Maybe you should join the testing committee so we can use your valuable input. So they do, some of them do. And what happens is they work really hard. Any of you who knows, who's actually developed a test, you know what, and done it right, you know how difficult the process is. You work nights, you work weekends, then, and you don't get any course release, you don't get any extra payment. And then when the test is administered, 99 out of 100 questions are perfect, no problem. But there's that one tiny question that has a little bit of an issue. So everyone is yelling at you, attacking you about that one question, because assessment occurs at a time of the year where there's high anxiety amongst teachers and students. So a teacher who has spent their nights and their weekends without any course release or payment, they throw their hands up in the air and they say, I've done all this and everybody hates me and is yelling at me. So why do I continue to do this? Oftentimes they don't. You know, it's kind of they volunteer for one semester and then they don't want to touch it. They leave it for others to do. So practicality concerns are often the reason for these behaviors. Washback is probably, if you weren't familiar with any of the cornerstones, this is the one you weren't familiar with. And this is the effect that a test has on teaching and learning. There are two types of washback, and the most famous type is unfortunately negative washback. And this is the dreaded teaching to the test, whereby your students are taking, let's say, the IELTS exam. And you teach them, and if they're taking the IELTS exam at the end of the semester, they don't want to do anything that isn't directly related to that test. Even though you tell them the IELTS exam is a test of general language proficiency, so anything we do in language is in effect preparing you. If it doesn't come from an IELTS test prep book, they don't want to have anything to do with it. Positive washback is what we should strive for, and that's where we learn something from our assessments, and we are able to use that information or that knowledge to improve the process, whether it be teaching, learning, assessment, curriculum development, or whatever. Our next cornerstone is authenticity, which is a key component of communicative language teaching. So as teachers, of course, whether we teach English or whatever subject matter, our aim is to produce students that are prepared to function in real world contexts. So whenever possible, our assessments should mirror those same real world situations, not only in terms of the formats and tasks that we use, but also in the language that we use as well. The good thing about authenticity is through the use of authentic materials for teachers and students find it very motivating. Transparency is yet another cornerstone. And this is the idea where teachers and students have a right to see how their students will be assessed. So it's the availability of clear, accurate information to students and teachers about the assessment. What types of information do our students and teachers need to have? Well, they need to know what they have to do to succeed. What's the pass mark? They need to know what types of content they can expect to be tested on. What formats will be used? How much time will they be given as a deadline to complete a task or a test? How much is the test weighted? What are the grading criteria? If there's a written component, they need to be able to see what the rubric looks like and any useful feedback for their improvement. Transparency is very important. Oftentimes, at the beginning of my tenure here in the Gulf, some 28 years ago, oftentimes transparency was mistaken for our last cornerstone, that of security. When we put in a lot of time developing tests, we want to make sure that we can reuse tests. We can't do that unless we have some kind of test security measures. So hopefully you have procedures in your department in place to keep tests secure, meaning out of the student's hands. And the one thing you can't really do is you can't give the students their test papers back if you really want to use them. Oftentimes you can't even let them see their test paper because now it's so easy to just whip out your mobile phone, take a picture, and then you've in fact retired your exam. So of course there should be clear policies on assessment security, cheating, plagiarism, and academic dishonesty. So what types of qualities, if you think you want to become a test developer, what kinds of qualities do you need to have? Well, you need to have a number of different pieces of knowledge. You need to know about and be aware of your own curriculum and the objectives. You need to also know the materials you use to teach those objectives very well. You have to really be aware of what type of instructional model or learning methodology is being used. You should have good knowledge about the test takers and the context, meaning your institution. If you're lucky enough to have a test specification, you should be able to interpret that test specification, and you should have knowledge in what different kinds of formats there are, the differences between high versus low stakes assessments, skill in item writing conventions, knowledge of what could go wrong with regard to item writing, and of course, a thick skin, because there's lots of, unfortunately, negativity around testing. All right. Now, the good news is hopefully in the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to give you some knowledge about the pitfalls of item writing. So you can be aware, especially those that are in objective types of test writing. So you want to get started. Well, you want to decide who will develop the test. Is it going to be you, or will you work with a team? Will there be a tester involved, or will it be teachers and testers working together? The ideal scenario, in my view, is the latter scenario, where you have teachers who know the curriculum and who are in the classroom, and testers who know about testing. So that's the ideal situation, teachers and testers working together. Next up, set a timeline for test development, and then do an inventory of what needs to be tested. If you've got a test specification, this is already done for you, okay? Classify this information by level of importance. That should already be done for you as well in the curriculum or in the syllabus that you use. Create a test plan, make decisions about what types of test item types that you're going to use. One bit of best practice these days is using a multiple measures assessment scheme in your classes. What does this mean? Multiple measures assessment is the realization that there is no one best type of assessment that will give you all the information you need to know about your students' level of mastery, whether it be of English or whether it be of a content area. So it means you use some traditional types of assessments, like tests and quizzes with objective questions. It also means you use some alternative assessments, like projects, portfolios, task-based learning, subjective elements, etc. So one essential element of best practice is multiple measures. So you're going to have to decide whether you're going to use objective versus subjective test questions. There are a number of advantages and disadvantages of each. With regard to objective test items, and these are MCQs, true, false, fill in the blank, matching. These are items where there's a short answer, the response is closed. The disadvantage here is that you test mostly recognition and recall. Very limited production, if any, can be assessed with this format. These types of items take a lot of training, so they're difficult to write well. However, when it's time to grade them, they're very quick and easy to grade. And within test properties, the more items you have on a test, the more reliable that test is said to be. And with objective type questions like true, false, you can have way many more items that are objective in nature than you can subjective. So they're deemed to be more reliable. The workload on this type of a test with objective items is upfront. It takes you longer to produce the test, but when it's time to grade it, it's very easy. Now with subjective type items like short answer and essay, you get a longer answer and the response is open. The emphasis here is on production. Now these types of questions are relatively easy to write, but where does the time go? They're very difficult to grade. They're time consuming. And then you have that old worry of inter-rater reliability. Because you can have fewer of these questions, they're not as reliable as their objective counterparts. So the workload on subjectively scored test items is, of course, after the test. Okay, so with objectively scored items, which is going to be the focus for the rest of our session today, there are advantages. You can test a lot of material quickly, increase reliability, less time to mark and analyze. Also, students can't bluff their way up through the answer. However, they do encourage guessing as well. You can also use statistical analyses with these types of items and get a lot of good information if you have that capacity. And there's little or perhaps no variation in marking because people work off a key. Now, the disadvantage here, the main disadvantage is that you can't really test production, which is an important part of communicative language teaching, or in many content areas as well. So these things are time consuming as well for grading, and they also promote guessing. And test wiseness can also be an issue. Some objectively scored items like MCQs are, especially when teachers write them, they are filled with problems. For example, there's one bit of test wiseness that students always hear. If you don't know the correct answer to an MCQ, choose the longest answer. And more often than not, when students do that, that answer is correct. Because when teachers write MCQs, they include more information in the answer to make sure that it is unambiguously correct, which oftentimes results in a longer answer. Another test wiseness strategy as well, if you don't know the correct answer of an MCQ, choose C. Oftentimes this works as well because when teachers write items, statistically, teachers avoid putting the correct answer in their own MCQs in the A position. Why? Because they want their students to read B, C, and D. So they unconsciously put the correct answer further down the list so that students read all the options. They know that if a student sees the correct answer in the A position, they're going to choose it without reading the others. So consequently, it's become a test wiseness strategy that students avoid choosing A because it's hardly ever the correct answer. So the rest of our time together, we're going to talk about some item violations that often occur. And I don't have a lot of time. We're going to only talk about a few of these. Some of these you might already be familiar with. Let's start with queuing. A queuing item violation is one that can occur in two places within the item, such as the example here. When you write for deposit only on a check, you are probably going to deposit the check into your account. So it's the kind of the word for word deposit. So that's queuing within an item. You can also have a queuing violation within the test, and that's where a student finds the answer to one question somewhere else on your test. A 3-for-1 split is where you have a typical MCQ has a stem and it has 4 response options. So it's where 3 of those response options are parallel, but the 4th is not. Sometimes people call this odd man out. So what's the 3-for-1 split here? Well, you have, if you look at A, B, and C, they're all verb forms. D is a noun form. Now, this is not such a bad item violation. The true bad item violation of a 3-for-1 split is where the one that is different is the correct answer. Because what happens when students see 3 things that are similar, they are automatically attracted to the one that is different. Okay, so this is not per se a bad item violation. Okay, impure test items are items that test more than one thing. So here, there's somebody ringing my doorbell lots, so I'm going to let you look at this and try to figure out what 2 things the person is testing. Okay, 1 minute. Sorry. What do you want? Who is this? Who is this? My apologies. Hope you all have found that the 2 things that are being tested here are word order and verb form. So test items should only assess one thing. Unparalleled options are where you have your response options aren't the same. Technically, they should be parallel in terms of the length and in terms of the grammatical structure. So here you've got I've tried to mix one up here that has both uh, non-parallelism in terms of length. So you can see a couple of these are a lot longer than others. And to make this item a better item, you could try to make it parallel. Since A is by bus, you could change B to by taxi, C by car, and D on foot. But there that item would result in another item violation, which was the previous one called a 3-for-1 split. And there again, somebody is at my door. My apologies. I'm going to give you the next item and let you see what the problem for this one is. Okay, 1 minute, hopefully. When we use vocabulary pertaining to gender, it's really important that we choose vocabulary that is kind of non-gender loaded. So I think you've all been able to pick out the word here that is deemed to be politically incorrect, and that's the word mailman. Other words that could be better here are one that is not gender loaded, like mail carrier, for example. We used to have a word in American culture called postal worker. But now any Americans who are here will know that that term is no longer used as well, because the term to go postal is now negatively connotated. So mail carrier is probably a term that is better used. If we look at an inflammatory tone type of item violation, we need to think about the test taking procedures are emotional. Students have high anxiety when they start a test. So we need to avoid material that has a negative emotional impact on students. Here, for example, this would not be a problem if you live in a country where soldiers are at war. This would be a problem for some places around the world. When I took training to write items for the TOEIC exam, one of the things I learned in that, because the TOEIC, like the TOEFL and IELTS, are exams that have a worldwide cohort, one of the things they told us, when you write reading samples or paragraphs and things like that, you can't write about any kinds of disasters. And I thought, well, because sometimes those kinds of tests, actually, those types of topics are interesting. And the reason being is that, okay, maybe tsunamis are not an issue for the Gulf, but if you're a test taker in Southeast Asia, this would be negatively connotated for you. So all kinds of things like that are not allowed. A double key is where this is the most common item violation that teachers make. And this is where there's more than one response option that is keyable. So of course, A and C are the two response options here that would work for this question. The second most common item violation made when teachers design tests is the no key. So this usually happens for a good reason. You start an item, you write a stem, and then you write your answer bank, your response options. But then you make changes to that stem over the course of the test development process, but you forget to update the list of response options, and it results in having no correct answer. Implausibility is when and for some reason, sometimes teachers, they like to, amuse themselves when they write test questions. So they include a distractor that is silly, okay? Either to be funny, to make themselves laugh, I don't know what. But in testing, and this is okay for teaching, but for testing, if you're going to have 4 response options with an MCQ, each of those response options have to be they have to attract students. So if you have one that's kind of a throwaway, such as Disneyland in this question, it's not going to attract anybody to the answer. So it's kind of like a waste of a response option or distractor. Outside or background knowledge is also important in teaching. This is sometimes called schema theory. And we want students, when they read, to actually activate their background knowledge to help them understand the text. But in a testing situation, we don't want students to be able to answer questions based on background knowledge. We want it to be based on comprehension. So for example, if you have a text on smoking on your test, and you write a true false question that reads, smoking is dangerous for your health. Do most people around the world need to read a text on smoking to know it's dangerous for your health? No, they don't. It's easily answerable. You don't need to be able to comprehend the text to answer that. Trickiness is when we focus on points that are really confusing even for native speakers. And this is my bête noire, as they say. I can never remember the difference between effect with an E and effect with an A. In fact, I have a document on my laptop that anytime I get confused, I actually open it up and read it if something doesn't look right. So now, does this mean to say that you can't have any tricky questions on a test? Sure you can. The 30-40-30 rule of assessment is as follows. 30% of your questions on any given assessment should be easy so that all students can answer them for the most part. 40% of your questions on a test should be mid-range in difficulty so that the great majority, the standard curve, can pretty much answer them. The remaining 30% of your questions should be challenging questions for the high achievers in your class. So tricky questions are usually a part of those 30 questions. So you don't want to have all of your questions being difficult, because what's going to happen, your class average is going to go down. The ideal mean of an achievement test, when you give a test, you want to look for a mean score. Mean is the arithmetic average, somewhere in the 70th percentile, between 70 and 79. The ideal mean is the midpoint of the 70th percentile, which is 75. So if you give a test that has all difficult questions, your mean is going to be way lower than that. Similarly, if you give a test that has all easy questions, everyone will love you. First of all, the students will love you. All the teachers will love you because all the students got really good grades. They all got A's, but you as a tester will know that you really haven't done your job, because unless you teach a gifted class, you do not have, everybody doesn't get an A in the average classes that we have. Inappropriate terminology is where we use vocabulary that is considered politically incorrect. And as you can see in this sample item, the use of the word crippled, things like crippled, disabled, handicapped, even physically challenged are words that are considered to be negative these days. Differently abled is better, things like that. If you're interested in terminology issues, you can look on the ETS website, ets.org, And they have a guidelines of fair testing practice, and they have literally pages of these kinds of examples. So I'm going to finish off with some tips for writing multiple choice and objective test items. Well, first of all, the question should be clearly in the stem. A student should not have to read the question and all four of the response options to know what the question is about. It should be clear from the stem. They also need to be clear, precise, and as simple as possible. 4 options are optimal for MCQs, with one being the unambiguous correct answer. The others function as distractors. The only exception to this rule is when you're using the best answer format. And for you English teachers out there, another exception to this rule is if you're doing listening. The listening skill, only it's recommended that there are 3 response options instead of 4. All response options should be parallel in that they should be the same length and level of difficulty. And the correct answer should require people to do some processing, not just selective verbatim, which is word for word matching from the text to the actual questions. Things like all of the above, even none of the above in MCQs, the use of the word never and always and true false, giveaway distractors, clues, and items that are based on getting a previous answer correct are also considered to be no-nos in the best practice assessment community. You should also avoid the use of jargon and textbook language, or what's called meta language in questions, and try to eliminate irrelevant sources of difficulty. One good example is the double negative. Double negative questions are even difficult for educated native speakers to figure out. So of course, for students who are learning in a second language, we want to avoid these kinds of things. If you do tests that have a section, the British school of thought is where you mix up the different types of items. So you have 1 MCQ, 2 true false, 3 whatever. Whereas in the American school of thought, we have 1 section that has all MCQs, 1 section all true false, 1 section fill in the blank. So I think it's easier for students to place all items of the same type in the same section. You also want to prepare the answer key at the same time as you do the test, so that the answer key is ready to go and ready for marking as soon as the test is finished. I've already discussed the 30-40-30 rule. And remember, one of those 30% easy questions should be the first question on your test, which is an easy question. If you're using a text, like a reading text that students have to read and answer questions about, place the questions in the same order as they appear in the text. This decreases the amount of difficulty. If you randomize or shuffle the questions in different order, this increases the difficulty on the part of students 2 or even 3-fold. One thing to include if you have test specifications is the word count that your texts need to be. A range is usually what's acceptable, and a readability level. Readability basically is the degree to which a text is readable, and there is a free readability measure on Word, basically. It's called the FK, the Flush-Kincaid Readability Scale. I wish I had time to explain it, but I'm running short of time. It's a very useful tool that will tell you to what, and it's an L1 scale. So if you do something, if you take a reading and run it through the FK and you get an FK 12, that means it's approximately the same level as a senior or a person in 12th grade in North America would be reading. Okay, so it gives you an idea, especially if texts are parallel. Make sure also answers appear equally in all positions. You don't want to become somebody like who's known as being Miss C, because you always put the answers in the C position. I've already told you how to calculate how much time students need to get to take a test. Once you have drafted all your items, send them out for people to review, etc., and get feedback. If you've got time, put together a practice test for students with the same kinds of model item types and the same instructions, so they get used to that before they actually take the live exams. If possible, run test and item statistics on your assessments if you have the capabilities. It's also important to provide washback or timely feedback. Of course, you're going to give your students their marks, and you're probably going to tell your students how they compared to everybody else in the class. When I give an assessment back to students, I always tell them what the class mean is, so they know how far above or below the classroom mean. Sometimes if I have the scores, I can tell them how they compare to other classes within our system of colleges and how they've done. One thing to make sure you do is to take time to reflect on any assessments. Research shows that teachers often ignore this stage of the test development process because they're just plain too tired after they've designed the test, written it, vetted it, administered it, graded it, etc. So they kind of run out of steam when it comes time to reflect. But you also need to make decisions about the test future. If you have a test and there were minor issues that can be easily fixed, make those minor changes right away, put it in the folder or the filing cabinet for reuse at a later date, retire the test if it didn't perform as well as you'd hoped, or take what did work from that test and maybe move it to practice exam materials. Retire it completely if it was a total disaster, okay? Don't even use it for practice. And then of course, finally, you can sit back and relax after a job well done. I think that's it. If you want a copy of this PowerPoint, you can contact myself. Here's my email, or George, I'm sure would be happy to forward it to you as well. Did I finish with, oh yes, 2 minutes of class, 2 minutes of time for any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you, Christine. I think that was very insightful. I know some teachers.
Again, my apologies for the interruptions.
No problem. Some teachers have to go because they have class in a few minutes. But there was a question by Noor. She's asking, I would like to know, how do you address the negative washback in your teaching? What strategies do you suggest?
Well, luckily, I mean, I always tell students why we're doing what we're doing. Okay. So I think as long as and I always do that at the beginning of class, this is our to-do list for today. These are my priorities. We're going to do 3 things, and this is why we're going to do it. And usually I don't have any blowback from students on, well, why can't we do some IELTS prep? Because oftentimes I say, well, this speaking activity is going to help you also. It's going to help you learn how to speak, but it's also going to be useful when you have to do that second frame, the individual long turn on the IELTS exam, for example. So I try to cut them off at the pass by giving them a reason why we're doing what we're doing. And students that's just one strategy.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? All right, great. Well, Christine, thank you very much for this insightful presentation.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you so much.
Again, my apologies for the interruptions. No one ever comes to my house. So don't think that there's like a continual stream of people coming to my house. It's very, very rare, but what could I do?
Thank you.
He wasn't going away, and I'm glad he didn't, because it was my bank card, my new bank card. So great. At least I'll have money in the coming days.
Thank you. So I've shared the evaluation and certificate form in the chat. Please do complete it, and we'll also be sharing the resources that Christine used, the A to Z, the glossary, as well as the TOEFL, the ETS guidelines. We'll post those on the LMS course for the TLDC, right? Thanks very much, everyone. And we'll see everybody again on December 6th. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see you.